Welcome back to another episode of Church is Stupid.
Comma butt.
Today with us, we have myself, Ruth.
Hi, I am Andy, as always.
And we have a special guest with us. So if you'll introduce yourself and just tell a little about yourself, that'd be great.
Hi, everybody. My name's Sarah. I am Ruth's sister. And I am a social worker and also the mom to two wonderful cats, Lucy and Louie.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Sarah.
So, this past week, technology has not been our friend.
Oh no, what happened?
And this is my little bit of, for everybody out there who's looking for our videos on YouTube or are like listening to the podcast in any which way. Sometimes technology isn't our best friend, and sometimes we don't catch things. And so, apologize to anybody who is listening or looking for last Thursday's episode. It got posted last Tuesday, and it got like buried in notifications. So if you're on YouTube, like looking for things, you wouldn't have seen it.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting mess. Well, and Anchor wasn't working for me either. So uploading to Spotify and Apple Podcasts was quite the
Technology
quite the
has
adventure.
been our nemesis recently.
It's true. Well, and Sarah's battery died in her car on her way over here, so there's a lot.
Yeah, that's a car issue, though. My car hates me, so...
Well, I just wanted to pretend like it fit in. I wanted you to be a part, so
No,
you're welcome.
my car just hates me.
Yeah. So, anyhow, all that to say, thanks for listening, and we appreciate you. And if you haven't had a chance to go back and listen to that episode, it is there. There was a Thursday episode, and it is on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, lots of other stuff. I don't quite
Yes.
remember everything it's on. But yeah, we're so grateful to have you listening with us. We're kind of fun sometimes. No?
No.
Well, speaking of fun.
Nope, that's
No.
not the transition.
Yeah,
to
that
make,
wasn't
No.
that wasn't a transition. There was no good transition. I'm like, what do I do?
I'll be
here?
honest, I had a good transition, but it
you did?
doesn't fit. And then you took over, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to let it go.
yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about a little bit of a heavier topic, and you have a little bit of a
Yes.
warning to give beforehand.
I do, because during this week's podcast, we're going to be talking about some really, really heavy topics, including trauma and traumatic experiences. So we just want to let you know that if that's going to be triggering for you, just consider not listening, or just take caution when listening to this podcast, because we will be discussing some very, very intense issues. So just wanted to put that out there for anybody who is listening who is not able to hear these conversations. And in particular, this week, we're going to be talking about the church and how the church deals with trauma. And we'll also be addressing how the church has caused trauma. And that will be Thursday's episode. So that's kind of where we're kicking off today. So this really comes from my own experiences. For those of you guys who don't know, I spent 4 years in my undergrad studying pastoral ministries, and I spent 3 years getting my master's of divinity in seminary. And so that's 7 years of schooling. And in that whole time, to become a pastor, I think I had 3 counseling courses. And none of them were really counseling courses that dealt with trauma. They were very specific pastoral counseling. And I think the church in general has this problem of taking on traumatic issues without having the experience to deal with them, if that makes any sense. And I had a really, really great professor, my first ever counseling course, who ingrained in us 2 really important topics. And the first one, or important things, the first one was that as pastors, we are not trained professionals when it comes to counseling, when it comes to therapy, when it comes to dealing with traumatic issues. And the important thing is to refer. If somebody is dealing with something that they need to be talking to a trained professional about, a pastor, there are some exceptions. There are pastors who are trained in that way, but that is not something that comes with a pastoral degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not a trained professional unless you go seek an additional degree.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first thing. And the second thing was that there will be issues in your own life that you will not be able to handle talking about with other people. For my professor, that was men who abused women. She was very unable to deal with that. And so if somebody came into her or wanted to come have her be their counselor, she would instantly refer them somewhere else because she knew that that topic was something she couldn't handle with a patient. And she really impressed upon us that there's something for everybody, that there's going to be some topic that you can't. And once again, in that instance, you need to know your boundaries and you need to refer that person to somebody who can actually help them. And so that's why we brought Sarah here with us today, because as a social worker, she has dealt with many of these things. And in particular, you've dealt with people with trauma in the church, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I've worked with a lot of clients, in many jobs that I've had, who have had trauma, because of things that have happened in the church or, surrounding the church. And, it's a topic that to this day they still don't, want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really difficult sometimes to know those lines, because one of the things the church wants to be so involved in active transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's like the point of the gospel is the ability, or is that transformation, that transformative experience. But when you get somebody who doesn't have experience dealing with trauma and they lead someone through the process of healing that trauma, it doesn't always go very well.
Yeah, it definitely can be more harmful than it is helpful if you're helping someone through trauma and you're not educated in how to help someone through trauma.
And you were talking about a particular training.
Yeah, there's it's called trauma-informed care. It's just it's classes you take that literally teach you how to help people who have experienced trauma, how to help them through that process of healing. And it's, it takes time and commitment and education to be able to do that.
Yeah. And have you seen, and do you have any instances that you can think of where a church in particular, or someone who's been going through dealing with their own trauma has sought out the church and how that church responded?
Yeah, I mean, I've had clients who, have sought out help from their church or something. Like they're going to church and they would seek out, going to them saying, hey, I'm, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I'm going through. Can you help me? And the church just says, oh, just pray a little bit more. Just read your Bible more, which can help some people, but that's, in this particular instance, that was not going to be beneficial for that person.
Well, and the church has a long history of being terrible at dealing with any sort of mental health issues. I have known a few people in my lifetime that have dealt with things like depression, anxiety, like severely crippling anxiety and depression. And when their church found out, they said, well, you can't be a Christian then.
Yeah.
Because Christians don't deal with depression. And it was very traumatizing to them.
Yeah.
But honestly, that that are you laughing because you know that that's happened?
I'm laughing because I don't know if I know many Christians who aren't depressed, but that's another subject entirely.
Well, and that's not like, it's, it's a very difficult thing to deal with. And I know when somebody walks into a church and they come with a lot of baggage, the church doesn't really know what to do.
Yeah, sometimes they end up just kind of treating them like a social pariah. Don't want to be around that person. That person's just going to bring the mood down. That person's weird. We're just going to let them sit in the back.
Yeah. and part of, I think, the reality that the church needs to embrace is that this isn't a recent problem.
Mm-mm.
This is a church historical problem. The church has never really, well, not never. I don't want to say never, but the church has had a history of poorly dealing with traumatic experiences. One of the big ones is through exorcisms on people who were going through traumatic experiences, who were expressing themselves in ways that now might be deemed like schizophrenic
Mm-hmm.
or having hallucinative episodes. I don't know the proper terms, Sarah. My apologies. Psychosis. Thank you. And people would bring in priests, and it would be a very, like, I've read a couple stories online of people talking about when somebody called in an exorcist for them. And yeah, it's a very, very traumatizing experience to go through. To be told, basically, for being who you are a demon. Andy, are you a demon? Is that why you're...
Oh, yes, I'm very much so. I am a demon in this case, and somebody should probably schedule me in for an exorcism or two.
Well, you know, I've gone through seminary, so I can...
You got enough candles to make sure I'm good?
Oh, geez.
So for somebody who's from the outside or maybe the less knowing about that kind of a thing, what exactly is an exorcism? And I guess historically meaning, but also like what relevance you know about it?
So exorcisms probably are most commonly known from a bunch of horror films.
Oh, yes.
Like The Exorcist.
They do exorcisms in that?
I know, it's really shocking. And so I feel like most of the portrayals of what an exorcism entails are very dramatized Hollywood versions where there's like a person spider crawling on the ceiling, and then this really like mean priest or like a mean nun. Sometimes that happens. Or if you've watched American Horror Story, when the nun gets the demon leaves the one person and then enters into the nun, and then the nun's the person with the demon. So it's like real weird. Anyhow, so the church has been, and there is scriptural relevance to exorcisms, because there are times where it talks about Jesus casting out demons in people. And particular, probably the biggest story is when the man had like a whole bunch of demons and he called himself Legion. There's many references in modern day horror films to Legion as a demon. And he casts out those demons and sends them into a herd of wild pigs that then run into the river and drown themselves. Yes, this is do you know this story? You're looking at me like I'm crazy.
I feel like I do, and I'm trying to think of where I remember hearing about it. But yeah, it's one of those.
Yeah, and the church has done. Particularly, you think of a Catholic priest when you think of exorcisms. I don't know how they aren't prevalent in the UMC. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard of my mother having to do an exorcism.
No, I've never been called up to do one.
I'll have to ask now for sure. Have you ever exercised somebody?
ask?
Wait, that's a different thing. Have you ever run on a treadmill with somebody?
Yeah, did you ever go exercising? But yeah, so particularly the medieval church did lots of exorcisms and did they really, I think, were one of the worst at dealing with mental health issues, because at the time the church was really known for building hospitals and doing things like that. Like if you've ever gone to a Saint something hospital, probably has a Catholic basis or Lutheran.
There's some tie to some form.
Tied to some form, and that's because the church was very involved in building hospitals for the sick. But they also, which is good. That's good. It's nice to build hospitals
that's a good
for the
first
sick.
step.
But when it came to mental health issues, they were also notorious for locking them up in asylums or locking them away in lots of different things. And that was pretty much any time in the medieval church that you disagreed with what the church did. You were considered somebody who had something going on, whether it was where a bad spirit possessed you, whether it was that you were just obstinate or needed to be locked away. And that was sort of how the church dealt with those issues. Like, oh, you're a little bit different. Time to go to the asylum.
Yep.
And actually, in the UMC, we're not exactly that innocent because John Wesley sent his wife to an insane asylum and never visited her ever again.
Oh no.
Yeah, that is some fun UMC history.
Didn't he do that because he was having an affair or something like that?
I don't know.
Okay, I remember.
I don't think so.
I remember hearing some stupid story about that, like he wanted to date somebody else or something like that.
Not that I'm aware of, but that doesn't.
It could be in a completely another case entirely of somebody sending. Many
Anyhow.
people send some people to the asylum. That's
Well, and even today, there's a lot of that prevalence of if you are a Christian, you don't have these issues is so popular. But it's so ironic because the ministry of Jesus was to reach out to traumatized people. I mean, look at what he dealt with the woman who was about to be stoned for being an adulteress. You think that wasn't a traumatizing experience? It was a horrible experience. I mean, your whole community finds out you're sleeping with somebody else, or I don't know what the exact situation was, and then they take you to go kill you. And then you kind of just, like, everybody just kind of goes away, but that stays with you. You know what I mean? Even the man who was possessed by Legion with all of those, he was living in a cave. Wasn't he, like, chained up in a cave or something weird like that? Anyhow, I'm going to say
You're
this,
the one who
and I'm going to
knows
be
these stories
really
best.
wrong, and so please forgive me if I am wrong about that story. But, like, coming out of that still would be an extremely traumatizing situation. But Christ reached into traumatized people's lives and brought a healing that only God can bring. And so I think the church has tried to emulate that. But unfortunately, it hasn't exactly gone well.
Yeah.
Like, and so what happens is we have a church that believes that it has the right to have this intimacy, believes it has the right to speak into traumatic issues, but doesn't have the training, as Sarah mentioned, to deal with them.
It's that, or you get a church that thinks that it has the ability to perform miracles and puts on stage shows all over the place, and you get people believing in these ideas that this man is a miracle worker and he's saving all of these people when in all actuality he may not actually be doing anything.
Well, there was a stigma. So, do you know anything, Sarah, about the stigma of taking medication, even while being a Christian, taking any mental health medication?
I mean, I don't know if I know the stigma specifically in the Christian world, but just in general, there's a stigma about taking medications for mental health, that makes you weak, or, oh, if you just did something that would make you happy, you would be fine. But that's not how life works. A lot of those issues are things that need to be taken care of with medications, but a lot of people won't seek that help because they're told that they just need to do something fun and they'll be better.
And as you indicated earlier, for the church, that's pray and read more scripture,
Yep.
and then you'll be better. But then nobody really seeks out to help you. Like you said, again, we talked a little bit earlier about being that social pariah.
Yeah.
Where it's like, ooh, the illustration that was always given to me was, it's like you're standing on a chair and you reach out your hand to help somebody. And is it easier for them to pull you down, or is it easier for you to pull them up? And they're like, oh, it's easier for them to pull you down. It's like, yeah, so don't hang out with those people. That was an illustration that was given to me.
Yeah, that's
Like, so it's like almost like, the good Christians hang out with other good Christians. They don't hang out with, it's that, oh, they've gone through so much in their life.
Oh, yes.
It's so sad. And then it's like it's just gossip.
Yeah.
It's straight up gossip. A couple of weeks ago, we had talked, it's probably been a month or so.
It's been a month since that conversation.
We had talked about how the church is really bad about not keeping those secrets. And especially when you're dealing with something through trauma, it is not your right to share that with anybody. It is the person who is going through that.
Mm-hmm.
And churches are little gossip centers. And that feeds it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, when your trauma is on display for everybody, that is not healthy. Have you dealt with, Sarah, a lot of people who, what does repression ultimately do to people? If they're being told to repress it, if they're being told to just pray and read scripture or to just do something fun, what does that end up doing to a person?
I mean, what I would think it would end up doing to people is that it would just, ultimately it might, emphasis on the might, make them feel better in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but, you never know, 3 months down the road, something might trigger them, and they've been repressing everything. It triggers, they have a mental breakdown because they've been repressing everything.
Mm-hmm.
Mental breakdown, they could be hospitalized or, if a mental breakdown's severe enough, they'll never recover from that. And, those are things that can happen if you're repressing or you're not getting help when you're going through something traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
That ultimately is, what we don't want to happen to people, because we don't want to send people to the hospital or we don't want people to have mental breakdowns.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, when we're told to repress things, that's where there's really only one road that
Yeah.
it's gonna go.
And it ends up inflaring the issue, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't, it's like this pretense that it goes away.
Yeah, like I said, in the moment, they very well might feel better. If you're having, you're going through depression and you're having a sad day, going to the movies might make you feel better that day.
Yeah.
But the next day, you're still going to wake up and you're still going to feel depressed. Or with trauma, if you've gone through something traumatic, doing something fun might make you feel better, but that trauma is still
Mhm.
going to be there. Like it doesn't just magically go away because I went to see a movie.
And it creeps out in every aspect of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the last little bit of our this particular week's episode, I'd like to talk about what are ways the church could and I believe the church does want to help traumatized individuals. I think at the heart of I know myself personally, and most of the pastors I know, we really want to help. We don't want to hurt. We don't want to be the people who are saying, just go watch a movie. But we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So what are some tips you could give to those of us who are listening, or those who are listening, and those of us in this room, I guess, to help us help other people?
I think at the, one of the most basic things that you can do is just become informed and educated about what kind of resources are just in your area.
Mhm.
In general, what are some counseling resources? What's the number for your local community mental health? What is just having some tangible, like, here is some resources, being willing to tell people, I can't help you with this, but here are some people that can
Mm-hmm.
help with it. Like being willing to humble yourself and say, yeah, I can't deal with this. Like I want to be able to help you, but I can't, right now. And, and even, taking some trauma-informed classes, they do seminars on trauma-informed care. It doesn't make you an expert, but it's a good step to at least understand about how trauma does affect every aspect of your life. Trauma doesn't just affect your mental health. It affects your mental health, your physical health, your spiritual health, any aspect of you, your relationships with others. And, they do offer, a lot of colleges offer, conferences on those things. And I know that's not something everyone can do, but if you can. But I think a lot of it is just being willing to refer people out and being okay saying, this is not something that I can help you with.
Well, and learning to recognize the signs. Would you say that that's something like if you can recognize the signs in another person, being able to reach out?
Yeah, and that goes along with just being educated about trauma and recognizing the signs and knowing, because talking about your trauma is not easy for anybody, and it's not easy to talk about with anybody. But if, you can take those steps to recognize maybe if someone is dealing with trauma and, obviously approaching them in a kind way and saying like, hey, I can tell you're struggling, or, there's something going on, those are awkward conversations to have, but sometimes those are the conversations that need to be had with people to get them, starting in the direction of their own healing.
And in a loving way, not
Yeah,
in a belittling,
Yeah,
like,
not
oh,
in a,
you're
like-
really getting on my nerves, so you really need to go get help or
Yeah,
something like that.
Don't be like, oh, I can tell you've been just so depressed and down recently, what's wrong?
And for the average layperson
Mm-hmm.
who comes to the church, there's people in their congregation, there are people and I guarantee you there are people in every single congregation that have been dealing with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And they might not always show it, but they are dealing with trauma. How can the average person just be a support system for them?
Yeah.
Like what are things like, I mean, I know this is simple, very, very basic, but like not ignoring them.
Yeah, not ignoring them. And I think that one thing that is so important to say about trauma is that just because someone hasn't experienced what you consider an extreme trauma doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't experienced trauma. Because what trauma is to me could be different than what trauma is to you or what trauma is to Andy. Everyone has certain things that are traumatic to them that we might just be like, oh my gosh, that's not traumatic. Like, you're just being a baby. Like, don't say that.
Yeah.
But just being willing to be a support for someone, like that first step, just not treating them like, they are, crazy or they're, less than you because they've gone through something that's traumatic, and just being willing to just be there for them, because when people are going through trauma, they don't necessarily need 100 people to talk to about their trauma, but they need 100 people to be willing to just treat them like a normal human being.
Yeah.
And, not treat them like their trauma is the most important aspect of their life, of their personality, because trauma is not the most important aspect of anybody's life.
And so what I'm hearing is don't belittle.
Don't belittle.
Don't belittle. Be there for,
Mm-hmm.
but treat the person like a human.
Yeah, it's, and it's, I don't know.
And
if you've-
don't let the trauma be the first thing you see about a person.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever seen that little, like, cartoon, this popped into my head about, like, this sympathy versus empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And, sympathy is just yelling down the hole and being like, I understand what you're going through, but I'm not going to help you.
Mhm.
Empathy is crawling down into the hole with that person and being like, I will be there for you. Don't have, sympathy is important, but sympathy is not something that in the
That's-
long run is going to help.
And for an example, that's my thoughts and prayers are with you. Right? I think
Yeah.
that's a fair thing to say. That's the sympathy.
Yeah.
And the empathy is, hey, man, I'm praying for you, but what can I do to help you right now?
Yeah, it's, don't tell someone just pray and read your scriptures and you feel better. Be like, what is something I can help you with? Like practical things that you can help them with. Because prayer and scripture, reading scripture is important, but when you're going through trauma, that's probably not the first thing that someone is like, this is going to heal me.
Yeah.
This is going to make everything better.
And we're actually coming up on the end of our time for this first episode. Sarah, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
being willing to talk about this and to answer some of our questions and give us some tips on how to truly care a little bit more about people who have been dealing with trauma who attend our church. And again, I would really like to emphasize that there are many people who are dealing with trauma, and there are plenty, I'm sure, in your congregation, and a lot of traumatized people reach out to churches to find a place to be in. And so getting that education that Sarah had talked about, being informed, is very important. We need to be very careful. These are people's lives, that we're dealing with. And so if Andy, you want to close this out? I'm going to throw you on that one.
Okay. I guess just an important thing that we're saying is if you are an individual who needs help or is seeking help, don't be afraid to reach out to a church. We're almost just saying that they may not know exactly what to do, but sometimes just having a person to talk to is okay. Youth leaders, pastors, if you trust an adult, speak to an adult kind of thing. And I feel like that's very high school, middle school of me to say, like, find your counselor kind of thing. But talking sometimes is an awesome thing. And with that, I do believe we're very close to being, well, we are out of time. We're far over out of time. But I do want to thank everybody for listening to today's episode. Again, some of our content for this week may be a little bit more on the triggering side, a little bit on the heavier side. So just pay attention when you're listening. And if it's not for you this week, it's not for you, and that's okay.
Absolutely.
So for all of us here at Church is Stupid,
Comma but.
I'm Andy.
I'm Ruth.
And
I'm Sarah.
I want to thank you again for joining us, Sarah. And for the rest of you out there, I hope that you enjoyed the rest of your Tuesday afternoon.